expert. You may proceed, Counsel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Short. We're going to spend a good part of the afternoon exploring this particular period of history with you. Now, yesterday morning, and I'm looking at the provisional transcript between 10:18 and 10:20, you were questioned by the co-prosecutor about a meeting that Pipun talked about, a person who you spoke to at some length when drafting your book. And he asked if Pipun had talked to you about a meeting in April 1975, and your answer essentially was, no, that escaped me. He didn't mention that to me, and nobody else did either, and that is perfectly credible. So, my first question is this a memory question, or did he really not talk to you about it?
I think I have no recollection of him talking about it. I can't be absolutely certain, but it says nothing to me. So I don't think he did, and I don't think anybody else did. But maybe one does forget things. Maybe there was something. I simply do not recollect it.
Very well. When he testified, a question was put to him on this subject in E1/97.1 at 11:19. Counsel Verken asked him about whether he had talked about the meeting at the start of April 1975, which apparently concerned the evacuation, and he answered, yes, I talked about it with him. But I've heard your answer, so that is fine. Let me go on to my second point. The meeting that you did not hear about of April 1975, when the prosecutor refers to Pipun's statement and testimony, you say that's perfectly credible. Now, my question is, if you've never heard about this, and if nobody told you about this, what do you base yourself on to say that it's perfectly credible? Is that because Pipun says so, or what? If nobody had brought this up with you before in the past, if you hadn't focused at all on that meeting, what entitles you to say that it's perfectly credible? Thank you.
Simply that if you tell me, if I'm told that a meeting took place at B5, which was what was stated yesterday, at the beginning of April, why not? Why should there not have been a meeting there? I don't know about it, but what grounds do I have to doubt that there was a meeting there? I'm not saying there was or there wasn't. I'm simply saying I don't have any reason to doubt it. Therefore, if you tell me there was a meeting, there was a meeting.
J'en reviens justement à...
Let's come back to what we were talking about this morning relating to your working methods, and in particular the people you talk to many years after the facts, even if they are speaking in perfectly good faith, who may nevertheless get it wrong. Now, yesterday when we were talking about the Central Committee in 74, and you said that the date of September 74 that you put in your book was not absolutely precise because you saw a copy of Revolutionary Flag which put the meeting in June 74. So, my first question on this date of September 1974 is, were you basing yourself on Pipun's testimony to choose that date?
Yes, I was.
Voilà, donc typiquement,
So this might be quoted as a typical example of where somebody gives you some information in perfectly good faith that is not in fact accurate. When I was talking about information, perhaps when certain facts are not cross-referenced or cross-checked, there may be points where information given to you may be inaccurate, even if it is given in all honesty. So, where things are not cross-checked, that may happen. That can be done perhaps as a historian, but you would also understand that in a court of law we would ask for slightly stronger guarantees. Do we agree on that?
We agree completely. I would go further. Where things can be cross-checked, they should be, whether for a court of law or for a historian. In that particular case, I was not aware of the reference in revolutionary flags. And I would say more, the great problem with memory is chronology. People usually remember more or less accurately, and it's sometimes less accurately, what happened. They very often confuse when it happened. One of the great problems of writing about democratic Cambodia, and a problem for you as a court in judging it, is that to such a great extent you're relying on memory. And documents may be relied on, at least the contemporary documents say what they say. Memory is treacherous. I accept absolutely the qualifications you're making, but that applies to history and to all of us.
nous aurons l'occasion de revenir.
Thank you. I think we can come back to this issue of checking and cross-checking and so forth at a later stage. But right now, can I turn to your reference to the situation in Cambodia on the eve of the evacuation of Phnom Penh? You referred to the prior years, and in your book you explained at considerable length how you believed that even if the US bombings had a big influence on things, that did not explain everything. From a purely economic standpoint, would you agree with me that in 1975, as in the previous years, the predicament of Cambodia, economically speaking, was difficult, that there was a particularly backward agricultural system?
In 1975, the economic situation was worse than difficult because there was a civil war. Parts of the country were very large parts occupied by the Khmer Rouge, some remnant parts by Lon Nol. There was tremendous disruption because of the war. I would not say it was because of a backward agricultural system. It was the economic predicament was primarily because of the disruption of warfare.
Et comment est-ce que vous...
In which case, how would you describe the agricultural system of the time?
Backward, undoubtedly, but that did not prevent economic development, inadequate and uneven certainly, during the years before 1970. Cambodia was not one of the poorest countries in the world. It was not a basket case which required constant aid in order to feed itself. The economy was not advanced, and in many areas it was really very, very backward, but it was sufficient to feed the population and to assure a slow, inadequate, but nonetheless real progress in economic development.
Staying on this subject of the economy, in your book, you discussed prevailing ideas of the time while referring to Kyosampan's thesis. It's on page 290 in French, ERN 006398229, English 00396498. And I will point out, for the benefit of the interpreters, that I will be taking a second quote from the following page. So on this page, you say that in the mid-1970s, this hermetic approach to development, and here you seem to be referring to Kyosampan's thesis, in the middle of the 1970s, this hermetic approach to development did not seem nearly as outlandish as it would in the internet-linked globalized world of 30 years later. A group of Western social scientists asked in 1976 to draw up a blueprint for the future of Thailand, proposed a program with more than a passing resemblance to the radical measures then underway next door. Relocation of the surplus urban population to the countryside, confiscation of unproductive wealth from the rich, and increased investment in agriculture. Perhaps I should slow down, says the speaker. David Chandler, the doyen of Western historians of Cambodia, wrote the same year that autarky makes sense. Let me continue on the next page. In the second paragraph, at least in the French version, none of these were left-wing authors, but they were all aware of the development failures from the 60s and 70s. The turnkey factories had, in the words of his French advisor, Charles Meyer, provided an object lesson in how not to go about it, and they were willing to look with a new eye at radically different approaches. In the light of the ideas that you were discussing about the economy and the development of the country, I am reminded of a point you made yesterday by saying that it's not so much that the objectives themselves of the Khmer Rouge were wrong, it was the methods used to implement them, which led to disaster. Does this reference to the work of sociologists and economists of the time in any way amend your feelings about the objectives not being bad in themselves?
I think during this trial said consistently, and it's in my book, you've just read it out, yes, the objectives were completely rational. There was much to commend them. The problem was the way they were carried out.
J'en viens maintenant.
Thank you. Another point that you were discussing with the co-prosecutor yesterday concerned the evacuation, and one particular facet that you raised, and I'm looking in the book at page 286, French ERN 006398225, and in English 00396-494. And in a paragraph about evacuation, you say that Nunchia and Kyosampan were sent to inspect the northern zone checkpoint at Brekadam on Highway 5, The speaker says, I shall begin again and try and go a little more slowly. I repeat, Nuon Chea and Kyo Sampon were sent to inspect the northern zone checkpoint at Plek Tam on Highway 5, while Mok shuttled back and forth to the southwestern zone HQ near Takeo. When you were asked about this yesterday, you confirmed to Judge Cartwright that you weren't told that by Kyo Sampon. You were diplomatic at that point, but in your footnotes, perhaps somewhat less, by saying that this was a lie told by Kyo Sampon. My question then is, what is your source on this particular point about the presence of Kyo Sampon and Nuon Chea at this checkpoint?
My source was Pipun, and he was present at the was indeed one of the first to go into Phnom Penh, and came back, having been in the first day, then went back in with Pol Pot the day after. I found his account credible for certain very understandable reasons. The word lie may seem unduly harsh, but we must call things what they were. People do tell untruths when they wish to conceal something. This was a particular case where I had no doubt that Mr. Kyo Sampon's account was untruthful for understandable reasons. And indeed, in our interviews, there were one or two other points where my judgment was that he was not being truthful because he didn't wish to specify certain things. That is completely normal when discussing history with a participant. It happens all the time, but it nonetheless constitutes a lie.
Là encore,
So once again, we have Pipun as our source. Did you cross-check this information on this particular point with anybody else about the presence here of Nuon Chea and Kyo Sampon at the checkpoint?
In an ideal, I'm not avoiding your question, in an ideal world, one would be able to cross-check everything. In reality, you cross-check what you possibly can. There was no other source that I encountered, no verbal source, which was able to corroborate Pipun's account. I've explained my judgment was that it was credible, and I think in subsequent statements, Mr. Kyo Sampon himself has changed his version, no longer claims that he basically came into Phnom Penh a month or so later.
justement, après.
Well, indeed, on this question of I arrived a month later, according to Kyo Sampon, where does this information come from that he arrived a month later in Phnom Penh?
In his interview with me, that is what he said, and that is what's in the footnote. And he gave a similar version. We would need to check the text in his discussion, the book by Insa Piep, which was based on discussions with Mr. Kyo Sampon.
Là encore.
Well, let's come back to what we were saying at the start. As you said, in cases where an awful lot of time has gone by since the facts occurred, having precise information about the specific time of an event is not always very easy. I'm going to turn to a different example. In your book, you date Pol Pot's entry to Phnom Penh at the 20th of April. First question, what is your source for that particular date?
The inescapable Mr. Pipun, who was with him and dated it there, dated it to that date.
Est-ce que vous avez d'autres sources pour
Do you have other sources for that date of the 20th of April?
I'm hesitating simply because I would not be honest if I said I'm sure I don't have any other source. I can't recollect. We're talking about memory. You're asking me to remember things which I researched and wrote 10, 12 years ago. The basic source was Pipun. I can't tell you whether there were others who spoke of it happening at that time or not.
En fait,
What unsettles me about these dates is that in his book, David Chandler talks about the 23rd of April in brother number 1. In English, it's 003930018. So he gives the 23rd of April. And you, using Pipun as your sole source, I believe, say in footnote 286, say that in an interview with a Yugoslav journalist, Pol Pot said that he came in on the 24th of April, and your comment on that in that footnote is that this is not correct, not because he needed to be telling a lie, but because he was not concerned about the accuracy of facts. So you, as a researcher, have seen Pipun X years after the facts, a good deal after 1978, and then in 1978 Pol Pot himself says that he came into Phnom Penh on the 24th. You have other writers who quote the 23rd. So how can one be so sure in saying that none of this is true? It's the 20th of April. What is the basis for such certainty?
I cannot answer for David Chandler. I am sure from my conversations with him that when he wrote that in Brother Number 1, he had not talked to any of those who were with Pol Pot at the time. I don't know where the 23rd came from, but it certainly was not from a source who was part of the Khmer Rouge group outside Phnom Penh. The 24th, I can understand. I said he was simply casual about the truth. It may be that he wanted to distance himself from, this is speculation, from the evacuation. In other words, he arrived after the people had left. In historical situations like this, where there is no documentary evidence, where, as you rightly say, memory is fallible, you have to make a judgment. And I'm not sure how much difference it makes whether he went on the 20th or the 21st or the 19th or the 23rd or 4th. But I am a source which was with him and who remembers going in himself to Phnom Penh, bringing back, I think he told me, a jeep and 2 cars, and then next day going in and telling me the route he went on, through the back route, to Phnom Penh with Pol Pot. That is a fairly circumstantial account, and unless somebody else is going to come up with something which really causes me to doubt it, and nobody has, then I am inclined to believe it.
encore une fois,
Once again, just now we talked about dates and facts. What Chandler says about the facts does not greatly differ from what Pipun says, namely that first the soldiers reached Phnom Penh and then Pol Pot and his entourage came after. Firstly, they wanted the situation to be secure on the ground. So in terms of the sequence of events, I think we completely agree. But what I don't understand is why is Pipun better than Pol Pot when you say in the footnote about Pol Pot that he didn't have any particular reason to lie because he took the decision himself. Why more one than the other in the tallying of information, and why so categorical?
You are perhaps right. I should have been less categorical in that footnote. However, when you look at the statements that Pol Pot made from 1975 to 79 and afterwards, they are peppered with deliberate lies, or sometimes, no doubt, accidental lies. When somebody fairly systematically in his public statements and in his interviews distorts the truth, he is less credible than someone like Pipun, who, speaking long after, had absolutely no reason whatever to distort the truth. Again, I find Pipun more credible than Pol Pot when he was in power, giving a version of events which suited his needs at that particular time.
Là encore, on rappelle.
Well, I wasn't really talking about deciding or not deciding to tell lies. I was talking about the human capacity to make mistakes. For example, to quote an example, there was the meeting that wasn't in the end of the year but was in June 74. So it's not just about whether or not you wish to tell a lie, it's the capacity to make errors and to have inaccurate memories. So I'm asking you about your work as a researcher. There are many points of information, like the one I've just mentioned about Nuncha and Kyosampan at the checkpoint, where only one person has said it. There hasn't been cross-checking, and there is no kind of nuance to the statement. It is categorical. And again, as I've said before, we're in a court of law, and so when you quote sources, I need to know how credible they are. You explain that you have every reason to believe this source, but when I take the example of the date at which they arrived in Phnom Penh, where there is no particular reason to tell lies, you are again very categorical, but without the cross-checking. So what I'm submitting to you is that even if Pipun had not the slightest intention of lying, it is possible that he made a mistake. And since there is no cross-checking, we are talking about the version of one single man. Do we agree on this?
We absolutely agree, and I have already said that chronology is the thing which people muddle most easily when they are relying on memory. I can't repeat that too often. It's a subject I could talk about a long time because it's the historian's greatest problem. You keep saying you assert this as fact on the basis of one statement without cross-checking. Well, with respect, there are situations in which you cannot cross-check. There is no other source. When there is only one source, you either believe the source, or you disbelieve the source, or you say it may have been on this day, or it may have been on some other day. Now, in my judgment, that account was sufficiently credible to say, I believe it, it was on this day. I didn't think it was necessary to say in my book, he may have arrived on the 19th, he may have arrived on the 20th or 21st. It would make a very boring book, by the way. But we're not sure, but it was around then. In my judgment, it was very probably on the 20th. But I would repeat again, dates are the weak link in any historical work based on oral history.
Well, just a point of clarification. Pipun testified here before the chamber. And can you confirm to us that he was one of the messengers or one of the bodyguards, that's how he introduced himself here, who was working for Pol Pot?
He started as a messenger and bodyguard for Pol Pot. After 1975, he became the head of security at the Foreign Ministry, at B1.
Fine. So we're speaking about the period from 75 to 79, which is, of course, the period that we're focusing on here during this trial. In 1975, when he arrived in Phnom Penh, what was his rank? What was his position, so that we are clear in terms of chronology, as far as you remember from speaking to him?
At that time, he was an aide, a bodyguard, if you like, to Pol Pot.
Was he in any way a member of Central Committee or of any kind of leading body at the CPK?
No, he was not.
Thank you for this clarification. Now I would like to turn to a second issue that you brought up yesterday with the co-prosecutor. In particular, a segment of your book. In the English version, it's on page 313, and the French ERN is 00639-867, 00396-521 in English. This is a segment that was read to you by the co-prosecutor, if I'm not mistaken, and you say Sompon was also in charge of missions that he felt that were too delicate to entrust them to others. Free translation. And I also checked your footnote here. There was Pipun. There is also a written record from the Standing Committee, which was brought up a few days ago. E3/182. Can we display the first page on the screen? In Khmer for the public. I don't know if you have it on hand, or do you need a copy, Mr. Short? Is it possible, therefore, to provide him with a copy? E3/182. You're inaudible.
Pardon. 00.
So it is 00292-868 in French. So this is E3/182. The Khmer ERN, French ERN is 00292-868. This is document E3/182. And the Khmer ERN is 00019-108. And the ERN in English, I don't have it, but it's the first page of this document. And I will provide you with a copy, Mr. Short, of the first page in the English version.
President, court officer is now directed to bring this document to the witness for examination.
C'est un document.
So this is a document that you already discussed with the co-prosecutor and with Judge Cartwright, I believe, or in any case, you are aware of this document, which describes the breakdown of tasks. And on the first page, at item 4, we see Comrade Hem, responsible for the front and the royal government and commerce for accounting and pricing. Can you explain to us what you mean by the quote-unquote delicate missions that were given to Khieu Samphan based on the footnote regarding this passage here?
I think we've already established that Khieu Samphan had two roles. He was, as described in this document, responsible for the front, royal government, and commerce. All that is quite clear. He also, as I think he himself has confirmed, was one of the members of the General Office. And after Deurn's liquidation, he continued to work for the General Office, along with another man who is mentioned in this list, Comrade Yem, who's identified as Bureau 870. And in that capacity was sent by Pol Pot to the provinces and to the zones, in other words, when there were what I've said, particularly delicate matters, and these were obviously delicate matters of a political nature, to be resolved or investigated. Khieu Samphan was not, he didn't have the authority to resolve these matters himself, but he would report back to Pol Pot on what he found in the places he was asked to visit.
So my more specific question is, what were these delicate issues, and especially what is your source regarding these trips to the provinces? Who told you about these?
Well, I mentioned in the sources Song Si-keun. My interviews with him, this subject came up. I've also put down Pipun. I honestly can't remember whether, and you must forgive me, but this is memory, whether this particular issue of these missions was discussed with him. Khieu Samphan's role in the General Office is attested to by a document which I cite here, which is in the Vietnamese military archives. Delicate missions, I wouldn't wish to go beyond that in terms of characterizing. If I were to say when there was somebody who was under suspicion that Khieu Samphan was asked to go and make an assessment and report back on the situation, it might be so, but I have no specific grounds for saying that. Therefore, I would prefer to remain with the phrase delicate missions, politically delicate missions.
So, if I understood well, your main source stating that Khieu Samphan was in charge of delicate missions was Sun Si-keun. Regarding your was Sun Si-keun and the conversations you had with Sun Si-keun, if I understood correctly.
Whether it was the main source or whether it was one source, and I also discussed it with Pipun, I really couldn't say. But there were interview sources, of whom Song Si-kun was one. That I can be certain of. And there are references, as I say, in this document in the Vietnamese military archives, also to Khieu Sampan's role in the General Office. And since you mentioned it, Khieu Sampan was very insistent when we spoke. I'm sorry to have to go into this, but he was very insistent on not having had a role in the General Office. And when someone wishes to obscure a particular part of their activity, it surely is for reasons. Now, that is not a basis for what I wrote, but it is an element in judging the testimony of others.
Oui, alors, peut-être pour...
Well, maybe to make things a bit clearer here. What was Khieu Sampan's position? Regarding what was Khieu Sampan's position, corrects interpreter, I would like to quote an excerpt of his testimony or of his statements before the co-investigating judges regarding his work at 870. This is document E3/37. This is a document with French ERN 00156-681. And the prosecutor yesterday quoted passages from what Khieu Sampan said, but let me give you the full quote. And he's describing 870, and he says, free translation, this was an office of the Standing Committee, which was made up only of two people, Dun, the president, who was assisted, Pong, among others, and was in charge of politics. And as far as I'm concerned, as I said, I was in charge of drafting a price table for cooperatives to distribute goods in the region based on instructions from the Standing Committee and of establishing relations with Prince Norodom Sihanouk. So, before the co-investigating judges, Khieu Sampan speaks about his activities within 870. He speaks about his relationships with King Sihanouk. English ERN, I'm sorry for this, 00156-754. So he speaks about his activity at 870, and he confirms what was written in the record from the Standing Committee, which I just provided to you. Now, regarding 870, yesterday again, when the prosecutor asked you to comment on the fact that Dun had disappeared, and when he asked you if you knew if anyone had replaced him, you said that there were no official documents mentioning someone replacing him, and I suppose you agree with this. And you said, however, that it was possible, and let me get back to what you said exactly.
Donc c'était...
So this was yesterday, at around 10 o'clock in the morning. in the draft transcript in French, and this will be interpreted. Free translation: the office, being at the head of the office or managing it in reality are two different things. After Dun was sacked, no name was mentioned as the person in charge of the general office, so I believe it's reasonable to believe that Khieu Samphan had an important role, and this matches what was said about his missions in the provinces. And here I speak about the moment that followed Dun's sacking. So, first question is, what is your source to speak about these alleged missions to the provinces? Is it still Sun Sikun?
The President, Mr. Expert, could you please hold on? International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not on my feet to object, and I certainly wouldn't impute to my friend a deliberate omission. But when she read that portion from the Khieu Samphan interview with OCIJ, at least in English, the sentence didn't come through in full, and I just want to make sure we have it on the record, or the two sentences that are of relevance for present purposes. It was one office of the Standing Committee. It had only two members, Dawn and me. We didn't hear the words "and me," and I just want to make sure we have that accurate on the record.
Non, je rassure, monsieur.
No, indeed, in French I said that I read the totality that indeed states the passage that you read yesterday, stating that he worked with collaborators, among which Pong. So let me return to my question, Mr. Short. The question being, what are your sources to state that he was sent to the provinces? And you spoke about delicate missions, but you said that you could not be more specific about this because you didn't know what these missions were, or you didn't have any details about these missions. But is it Sun Sikun who spoke to you about these missions?
I have already said that he was one source, maybe the principal source, and I repeat again, he was a source for that affirmation. I would not wish to go further on delicate missions simply because I do not wish to mislead the court. I feel it is right that I say what I have a reasonable belief of being correct, but to speculate beyond that would be misleading.
Oui, parce que
Yes, because as you said yourself, Mr. Sun Sikun testified before this chamber, and he did not speak about delicate missions to the provinces, nor did he speak about delicate missions as you describe in your book. That's why I'm asking you these questions. There was no further detail than that. Is that the case?
vous confirmez que
You confirmed that there was no further detail than this generic information that he provided to you. And by Pipoun as well, because I don't see any other people mentioned in the footnotes, which we are discussing now.
The President, International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
I apologize for interjecting again, but the statement just made may mislead. I'm not going to suggest my colleague is intending to do that at all. Saying Song Sikun did not speak of delicate missions may infer that he was asked about it. I think if my understanding of the record is correct, and I stand to be corrected if I've got this incorrect, I will apologize in advance. But I do not believe at the time we knew that Sung Sikun had given this information to Mr. Short. I don't believe he was asked about delicate missions by Khieu Samphan. So I just want to make sure that we're not telling Mr. Short now that this was asked of him and that he didn't provide consistent testimony in court.
À moins que Monsieur le procureur
Unless the prosecutor can prove to me that I am mistaken and that I do not believe that I presented things incorrectly to Mr. Short.
Je continue
Let me continue
déroulement de la
with speaking about this period. We spoke about the date when he entered Phnom Penh, and we spoke about your sources. We spoke about these delicate missions and about your sources. And now I would like to turn to the question we were discussing regarding 870 and the absence of documents regarding the person who substituted Dun at Office 870. So my first question is, was Office 870 something that you researched maybe more in detail than other topics?
Not more in detail than other topics, because it was a highly secret organization and served, if you like, as the nerve center for transmissions from the Standing Committee. I researched it as much as I could, and I think probably as much as anybody else has been able to. For instance, the Vietnamese documents mention Phuc Chai as being a member, Yem as being a member. You mentioned Pang, whose full name I think was Chim Sam Ok. Yes, I tried to discover as much as I could about it, but a very secretive organization does not leave a paper trail.
dans le cadre
There are several witnesses here who came to testify before this chamber, and some referred or mentioned Office 870. And in particular, 3 witnesses, Ms. Nom Sem, who testified on 25 September 2012, and this is transcript E1/126.1. We also have a witness called Tan, testified on 13 June 2012, E1/86.1, and also a so-named Savi, who testified on 8 January 2013, E1/156.1, and also Hong Sapong, who was heard on 3 September 2012, E1/120.1. And during these testimonies, questions were put to them on who was the person leading Office 870, and the names mentioned were Pong, Ken alias Lin, and more specifically, Madame Nomsen, Lin's wife, said in her testimony of 25 September 2012, E1/126.1, French ERN 008499695, English 008495865, French, Khmer ERN correction interpreter 00850-477. And she knew Pong at office 870, and she is asked, who replaced Pong after he disappeared, and this until 1979? And the answer was, Pong's successor was my husband. Question. You said to us earlier that a certain number of bureaucrats were placed under the supervision of 870, and after Pong was replaced by Lin, were these K officers, correction interpreters, under the supervision of your husband or of someone else? Answer. Maybe I should slow down a bit. My husband was, generally speaking, in charge of Office 870. Now, regarding the other officers, maybe he supervised them, but I don't really know that clearly. Then, the first question is, did you ever hear that Lin had replaced Pong, who apparently worked for Office 870 after Dön? Did you ever hear any information in that regard?
The President, Mr. Expert, could you please hold on? International Court Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Your Honours. We do seem to have a problem again with a selective use of information and facts. If one wants to quote every witness that was asked about the Office 870, then one should be complete. Two witnesses in this trial also testified that Khieu Samphan became the head of 870. There were Pipun and Kangik Yuv alias Dutch. And I want to make sure that's on the record so that we're not misleading the expert as to just what this court has heard.
I don't see where I am distorting the information. I'm saying the witnesses who testified, I'm speaking about Mr. Lin's wife, and she says that her husband was in charge of 870. And I'd like to remind to the co-prosecutor that he had full liberty to present all of the information he needed. So I'm asking Mr. Short, however, if he already heard of Mr. Lin, whose wife is saying that he was in charge of Office 870. And Mr. Pipun, well, we will get to that later.
Donc je maintiens ma question, excusez-moi, monsieur.
So I'd like to stand by my question. Did you ever hear of...
I heard of Ken. I heard of the man by his name Ken. I did not know he was also called Lin. And my understanding was that he was the head of a messenger unit. I can't remember the code name, but which was attached to 870. I did not hear of him being the head of 870. I must be truthful, I did not hear of Mr. Khieu Samphan being the nominal head of 870, but I did have reason to believe that he played an important role, and that was on the basis both of interview material and of the references in the Vietnamese archives.
Et
Picking up on the subject of Pipun, since you spoke to him, did Pipun talk with you about the fact that Khieu Samphan may have been in charge of 870?
To the best of my recollection, no. I would really, I have in Paris the texts of these interviews. I don't have them here. They're not accessible. If I were to go and look, I would be able to give you an accurate answer. But to the best of my recollection, no. Did I ask him specifically Was Mr. Kusampon head of 870? I'm not sure about that either. So I don't want to mislead you. I really can't take that further.
Il n'y a pas de problème, Monsieur Short.
There's no problem there, Mr. Short. We're certainly not asking you to say things that you do not know. Thank you. Let's turn to another point, which also came up yesterday with the co-prosecutor. He took an extract from your book, which I will read to you. It's page 366. The French ERN is 00639-935. 00396-574. And the sentence, which was read to you yesterday, goes as follows. Confessions of treason were needed for men like Yen Sari and Kyo Sompon to read out at closed party meetings. What I want to ask you is, again, what is your source about these closed party meetings, and what sort of meetings are they exactly?
These were meetings of, for instance, ministry officials. Laurence Pic, in the manuscript from which her book was taken, writes at some length about them and describes in particular meetings at which Ieng Sary read out confessions. And I'm having a blank, but it was another mid-level Khmer Rouge official to whom I spoke about this, who lives or lived near Pailin. I would, after the break, perhaps provide you with the name.
Certainly, we'll come back to this. You've mentioned Laurence Pic and meetings in the Foreign Ministry, and this also concerned Ieng Sary. And I'm just wondering if you have an example, for instance, is when Ieng Sary and Kyo Sompon, the two together, read out these things at closed party meetings, and if you have a source to quote.
No, I have no source for saying the two together read out these things at closed party meetings. And indeed, closed party meetings or closed ministry meetings, closed meetings of Khmer Rouge officials. But Kyo Sompon did chair such meetings. Ieng Sary also did. And my sources say that on occasion, to illustrate the theme of the meeting, confessions were read out.
So, if I understand correctly, you are referring in general terms to this kind of meeting, but nobody spoke to you specifically about a meeting during which Kyo Sompon read out confessions. Is that right?
The mid-level official at the Foreign Ministry to whom I spoke, and it was not Swang Sikun, it was another official, did refer to a meeting at which he had attended where Kyo Sompon had read out such a confession.
So on that point, Song Sikun is your source. Is that correct?
No, I said not Swang Sikun, another mid-level official, whose name temporarily escapes me, but I'll find it.
Thank you very much. Okay, we can certainly come back to that after the break. There's no problem with that. Mr. President, do you want us to go on now or take a break, since we are completing at 4:30? Would you like to go on until 3 o'clock, as we did yesterday? I am, of course, at your disposal.
The President, you may continue until 3.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, a point that came up yesterday, where you commented a little on the statements you made in your book, and just to refresh our memories, I'll reread the extract. The French ERN is 00639-941, and the following page. In English, the ERN is 396579. And I must ask my team to assist me with locating the page. But it's 371 in the English. And you tell us that Paul himself decided on the most important arrests, sometimes in consultation with Khieu Samphan. When questioned yesterday on that extract, you said, or perhaps I'll actually find what you actually said so as not to misrepresent you. Just one moment, please.
Excusez-moi.
I apologize, Mr. Short. I'm wasting the chamber's time. My post-it seems to have come unglued.
Je vais retrouver les...
Well, I'll find the exact words that you uttered a little later, but broadly speaking, what I understood from the explanations you gave us yesterday was that you didn't think that Khieu Samphan took the decisions jointly with Pol Pot, but that this was following a certain form of logic whereby he was in charge of sensitive missions. In other words, you are not really referring to precise examples where he actually did advise Pol Pot on this or that arrest. I can find what you said precisely yesterday, but is that a decent summary?
It is. I remember the discussion, and we spoke about the meaning of consultation. Consultation could cover many different things. Yes, my understanding is that this would be on the basis of Khieu Samphan's findings after what we discussed earlier, delicate missions to the provinces. And the source for that are the interviews which Dirk gave some years ago before he was arrested. He gave a series of interviews of which I was able to get the texts, the transcripts, and in those interviews he referred to precisely this process.
Et est-ce que
And did Duke tell you if he had seen Kyo Sampon during that period and how he drew his conclusions?
No, as I said, I did not interview Dirk. They were interviewed. He was interviewed by a British journalist, Nick, if I remember rightly, Nick Butler. But I had access to the complete transcripts of the interviews.
I think I've got the reference that I mentioned a moment ago. And you said about the question of the arrests, translation from the French, this conclusion in my book, and this was at 9:46, this conclusion in my book is based on the fact that consultation may have many meanings, and I based myself on a source that I consider sufficiently reliable to use it in the book. Was it sufficiently reliable for the Chamber to base itself on that? Well, that's a question that you raised yesterday, but the fact is that during a certain period of time, Pol Pot used Kyo Sampon to make missions to the provinces, and he was sent to assess the situation in the provinces, and he came back to report back. And so there again, when you talk about this, you are presumably referring to that middle-level cadre whose name you are trying to remember.
Long Narit is the name of the middle-level cadre.
et
What was his precise position?
He was in the foreign ministry. No, sorry, Long Narin, not Narit, Narin, Long Narin.
et
Did he tell you at what stage he was interacting with Kyo Sampon when he talked to you?
Interacting is, I think, too strong a way of putting it. He was part of the audience at a meeting which Kyo Sampon chaired for officials.
excusez-moi, là vous me parlez.
Okay, so we are talking about a meeting during which confessions were read out?
We are.
Et je suis désolée.
And sorry for picking at the detail, but did he tell you where the meeting was held and as part of what event?
Not to my recollection, and I would probably not have thought it that significant. What interested me was Lawrence Peake gave an account of this happening. Long Narin mentioned it happening. You mentioned the necessity to cross-check. Here were two completely different sources speaking about the same thing happening. I certainly have no note of exactly where it happened.
Je vous pose cette question parce que
I'm asking you the question because Lawrence Peake was the wife of Sung Si-kun, who was working in the foreign ministry, and Long Naren worked in the foreign ministry as well, and you are talking about a closed-door meeting. But you cannot, I believe, tell me if this meeting itself was in the foreign ministry.
je voudrais passer.
Let's switch to another topic. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. Yesterday, with the co-prosecutor, the subject came up of whether you were aware of humanitarian or other assistance which the CPK might have received from outside the country. And you said you weren't aware of any. In the file which we gave you yesterday, there are a certain number of documents, records from the Standing Committee. Have you had a chance to look at those? I would like to glance at those documents together with you. The first is E3/230. The French ERN is 00301330. In Khmer, it's 0000500711, and in English 00182546. With your leave, Mr. President, I would like to put the first page in Khmer on the screen. Mr. Short, I think you're confirming there that you have the document before you. This is minutes of a standing committee meeting on the night of the 22nd of February 1976, and the participants in it seem to be Comrade Secretary, Comrade Deputy Secretary, Comrade Van, Comrade Vaughan, Comrade Kyo, Comrade Tuk, Comrade Hem, Comrade Dun, and Comrade Doik, if my pronunciation is correct. Under paragraph 4, you get Yugoslavian aid of $3 million. And underneath, I assume this is part of the recommendations, proposed buying $1 million of medicine, especially fever medication, disease fighting of all kinds, for example, antibiotics, energy medication, serum, etc. On the next page of the same document, paragraph 7, the title is Distribution of Chinese Aid Rice, colon, distribute a quantity of rice to Comrade Mut, 5,000 bags, to Kokong, 2,000 bags, Sector 25, 10,000 bags. As for the remaining amount, keep in reserve for use in Phnom Penh. My first question is somewhat superfluous since you answered yesterday, but I must ask you it again. Are you aware of this document?
Yes, I am aware of this document. And I spoke loosely and the court misinterpreted me, or I misinterpreted the questioning yesterday. But I certainly did not say that DK refused foreign aid. I was asked in the context of the food shortage in April 1975, and I said, no, the DK authorities refused to bring in urgently relief supplies in the weeks after their victory. I think I also said, if I didn't, I should have done, that a certain amount of food aid arrived at that time from China, whether it was in response to a direct DK request or not. Quite how that was arranged, I don't know. But there was a certain amount that came in. But afterwards, it's well known. I mean, the North Koreans gave aid with hydroelectric projects, the Yugoslavs, as is in this document. I think there was also a little aid accepted from Sweden. Foreign aid was accepted in limited quantities.
Ça me mène au
That takes me to the second document that I'd like to look with you, E3/238. I believe you have a copy of this, Mr. President. With your leave, I would like to have this put up on the screens. The French ERN is 00446-630. In Khmer, and this spans 2 pages, it's 000072458, and in English it's 004241112. These are minutes of a meeting of the Standing Committee from the 28th of February 1976. There were 3 participants, and in the copy I have, the only legible name is Comrade Toik, and the agenda is issues of aids from Sweden and Yugoslavia. Paragraph 1, it talks about aid from Sweden, and it says that the Swedish government has planned to aid Angola, Somalia and Cambodia in 1976 to 77 with a total of 180 million kroners or $40 million. In paragraph 2, there's a reference to aid from Yugoslavia. They have given us $4 million, but they've already spent $1 million to buy blankets and medicines. 15,000 blankets have been sent through Beijing. They asked whether we have received them yet. So, a priori, it would appear that Sweden and Yugoslavia were providers of aid. Were you aware during the period of democratic Cambodia of the aid provided by these countries?
Yes, I was. When I was aware at the time, because when I was in Beijing in the DK period, I knew the Yugoslav ambassador to Phnom Penh, and it was not something that was kept secret.
Staying with the same document, since we're talking about political positions vis-à-vis foreign assistance, and in French it's the same ERN, in Khmer and in English it's the following page. So in Khmer 00072459 and in English 004241113. This is what it says under the heading of Characteristics of Aids from Sweden and Yugoslavia. Political viewpoints. In order to receive the aids, we need to select independent countries, namely countries that are satellite to neither the United States nor Soviet. With these kinds of countries, we have force on the international stage. The United States want to suppress us. The Soviet also wants to suppress us through Vietnam. Therefore, we have to have friends in the world, the friends that are not, corrects the interpreter, in any league. I've nearly finished with this rather tedious reading, but under point 2, it says There's a new ERA in English, 00424114, and the conclusion that they reach is that they say that their aids are unconditional. However, any aid is conditional. For instance, they want to influence or get support from us, but this issue is all right. Therefore, anything that serves our revolution, benefits our revolution, we can take and thank them. After that, on the same page, although in French it goes over the page, it explains that assistance from Sweden will be used for the purchase of materials and from Yugoslavia for the purchase of medicines. Were you aware of this document, and would you say that the position that appears in this document, namely that assistance is accepted from countries where you can be sure of not becoming dependent upon them or undergoing pressure from them, is that concordant with what you yourself were able to observe during the period?
In broad terms, yes.
Monsieur le Président, je vois qu'il y a...
Mr. President, I'm going to be switching now to another line of questioning, so if you wish, this might be a good stage to have a break.
The President, thank you, Council, and thank you, Mr. Expert. Indeed, it is now appropriate moment already for the adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn for 20 minutes. Court officer is now directed to assist the expert during the adjournment and have him return to the courtroom when the next session resumes at 3:20.